Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. Now a few months ago I decided to look for some classic Scalextric Formula 1 cars and I bought the JPS Lotus and the Blue Tyrrell. I showed them on this channel. And then I thought it'd be really cool to find the two 6-wheel Formula 1 cars that Scalextric made back in the 70s, that being the Tyrrell and this March. Now I bought both of these Marches on eBay and I had a little bit of a problem with both of them. Typical eBay things. Problems not being disclosed, not cost effective to send them back, and I got a little bit burnt by both of them and I was a little bit unhappy. So what I've decided to do is sell this car here as is. There are a couple of things about this car that I don't actually like, which I will show you, but it's nothing wrong with it. And this one has got a few problems which weren't disclosed and I'm not very happy, and this is one that's going to undergo surgery. Now a few weeks ago, you'll remember I asked you on one of my mailing call-ins, what should I do with this car? Because I wasn't very happy with it. Should I sell it or whatever? And everybody in the comments said, fix it, make it run properly. So I'm going to do that. But there are actually 3 different ways that you can fix this car. One is just using Scalextric parts, one is using a Slotting Plus guide, and then there's the Swift Slots way. So that's what I'm going to be showing you today. I'm going to be telling you about this car and offering it to you if you want to buy it. And I'm going to be showing you 3 different ways to fix the guide on this car to bring the front end down. And then the last way will be the Swift Slots way, where we'll go to the bench and we'll start hacking into it. So let's get you on this table. I'll show you both of these cars in depth and then we'll go to the bench and we'll pull this one apart. Okay, car 1, which is actually really car 2, because I bought this car second, because the first car that I bought turned up with a broken wing, which I was very disappointed with. So I was on the hunt for a second one with a perfect wing. Now this car was sold by a very, very well-known slot car eBay seller. And I asked him before I bought it, was the wing in perfect condition? Was there anything wrong with the car? And he chose to ignore all my questions, which should have been a red flag. Now, what I did is I bought the car anyway because it looked perfect on screen, but I didn't really know what I was buying, and I wish I'd have waited for the answer, or at least just waited, because it turns out that this car is in really good condition. The tyres aren't too bad, the drive tyres are in good condition, the motor runs strong, but one of the questions that I asked him was this wing snapped, or was it glued in, because they're often snapped and glued, and he didn't answer. But what I've since found out about this car is this wing, I believe, has an aftermarket wing. I believe it's an aftermarket wing, and I may be wrong, so Scalextric people don't go mad at me, but I think it might be, because compared to the original wing, or what I believe to be the original wing, it's ever so slightly shorter. If you can see, it's about 1.5 mm shorter than the original. It's also quite dull, whereas the original one appears to be a lot glossier. And also on the bottom of what I believe to be the original wing, it's actually a part number. It says C129 if my eyes don't deceive me. And on the bottom of this wing, there's absolutely no markings whatsoever. So I believe that this car has actually got an aftermarket wing, although it's not actually broken. So that was one thing that really irritated me with this car. The other thing that irritates me is the box. They just don't present particularly nicely. The box just doesn't look... I know it's 40 odd years old. It's just me. It's a personal thing. I'm just not particularly blown away by the boxes. And like I say, the whole purchase of these 2 cars left me a little bit sour. So I'm a little bit negative on the whole thing anyway. So the box isn't all that great. The other thing that irritates me with the box is the cars don't really sit in the boxes particularly nicely. That's where the guide fits there, and the wing on the back there, and it all overlaps at the front. It's just a bit meh. So that's the problem with this car really. Other than that, it's absolutely amazing. There's nothing wrong with it at all. So we'll run some power through it now. There we are. Absolutely runs as sweet as a nut. There's no problem with it at all. So what I'll do now is I'll take off the chassis, and you can see, the other thing that it's got is a completely original, I believe, engine cowling. Absolutely fine, there's nothing wrong with that. There are no other marks and scratches on the car. It's in really good condition. Most of the white lines are still on the wheels, and as you can see, the tyres are actually in reasonable condition as well. The drive tyres are in very good condition. There's nothing wrong with the drive tyres. These rear tyres here, there's a little tiny bit of rot in them, but nothing very much at all. And you can buy these tyres anywhere on eBay. They're really cheap. You can get them from anywhere. So there's no dings on the front of it or anything like that. So let's just whip off the bottom and you can see the insides. And there we are. So there's the inside of the chassis. These drop arms are all there. They all look original to me. All the bearings are in good condition. Pinion's not split or anything like that. The motor's very, very healthy. Really nice chassis on there. And also the guide. These guides can have a problem of splitting on their actual mounts. So if I just peel that away there, you can actually see that's all nicely intact. There's no problems with that at all. Wires are in really nice condition. The whole car is in really nice condition. The only thing that annoys me slightly with it, as I said, is the fact that it's got what I believe to be an aftermarket wing. Other than that, this car's in really, really good condition. So this one is going to be sold exactly as it is, and I'm going to ask £35 for it on my website. I think that's a perfectly reasonable price. I paid £37 for it on eBay. I think £35 is perfectly fair, even though it's got this potentially aftermarket wing. The whole car runs really well. And at the end of the video, I'm going to run both of these cars around the track. I'm going to show you exactly how they both run. They both run very, very nicely. And this is car number 2, which is actually car number 1, the one that I bought the first time, which I've shown you on this channel already. So the problem with this car, as I showed you on my mail call video, is this wing had turned up broken because the seller had wrapped the box in a really nice packaging, but the actual car was free to smash around inside the case and it snapped the wing off. So what I did is I put a piece of piano wire up inside of here. It's about 10mm long. It goes from the bottom of this gearbox about up to about there. It's about 10mm. So a piece of 1.2mm piano wire, and it just ever so slightly started to show in the side of the spoiler there, because as the plastic cooled when it was molded, it sort of concaved in so that the plastic isn't the same thickness, so it just starts to show a little tiny bit, but it's almost nothing. But that wing is super solid now. It isn't coming off. It's never going to break. The plastic will break long before that piano wire. It's super solid. So that's the original wing, but it's actually fixed. So that was the first source of irritant with this car. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I kind of went off of it a bit. But the main reason I really went off of it is because of the ridiculous position that this guide is on the track. It's basically doing a wheelie. It's about 7.5mm at the front of this chassis lifted off the track. And I'll whip this body off now and I'll show you the problems with it. So the first thing I wanted to show you, which is why I kind of fell out of love with these cars, is because this front guide. So if I hold it here like that, you can now see the problem that I've got. These front tyres don't even touch the track by a mile, and I've already done my measurements on this. So the gap at the back here, just before the rear wheels, is 3.5mm, and then just behind the front wheels the gap is 5.5mm, and right on the very front it's about 7.5mm here, which is absolutely ridiculous. And as you can see, hopefully I can demonstrate here, the springing, I'm not putting any pressure on the back of that car, the springing of those braids is so strong that it's actually causing the car to ride up more than it should do. Now I know you can change the guide, the braids and everything else, but that's not really the point. The problem with that angle is that it's only the very, very, very backs of those braids that are actually touching anything. It's not actually making nice flat contact on the track. So you're relying on an incredibly small contact patch of the braids to keep the car running. So therefore the car is a little bit erratic when it runs around the track, because it has to rely on the chassis being flat and the very tips of those braids actually doing any work. And it's just not very consistent. So the next thing that really turned me off with this car, that motor mount has broken off. Now, I didn't notice it before, and it certainly wasn't disclosed in the eBay listing. So that really irritated me. And secondly, the other thing that again wasn't mentioned in the eBay listing is the actual guide mount there is broken off as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a quick way to sort out some of that height problem with just this standard guide. Then I'm going to show you how to fix it simply by fitting a slotting plus guide. And then I'm going to do a Swift slots job on it. So, how to solve the problem using Scalextric's parts? Well, as you can see, there's a step there, and that step is approximately 2.5 mm tall. Now, when you hold the car on the track like that, you can actually see it's nice and flat. Without this guide in place, you can actually see the car sits acceptably well across the bottom of the chassis with no real problems. So, on this guide, you've actually got a step in there which you can't do a huge amount with without some very careful trimming, which isn't really worth it. So leave that piece in there, but take away this piece here. You'll get to the same position. So, and then what you'll need to do is you'll need to take away this whole portion of plastic here, because the other problem, the other stupid design of this car, is that when this guide is clipped up inside that holder there, it crushes the wires into this tiny little void, and you end up getting this problem here with this wire here all sort of folded over. There's nowhere for that wire to twist, so that guide has got no chance to self-level, and it's got no chance to turn freely because it's crushed up inside this little gap here. So to fix this car's guide, because a lot of you are asking, you know, how can I fix the guide? I want to see how to fix it to get mine running well. Well, I would suggest that you cut away this section in here to give you some wire clearance, cut away this section here, cut away this tongue, and then cut away this ridge around here. And that will give you a much lower front end without being obscenely high, because when you take away that, you'll still keep the ring on the bottom of your guide, which will give you the correct height. So when you put the car on the chassis there, on the plate there without the guide in it, you'll see you'll end up with something almost exactly the same ride height as you've got there by doing it that way. Now, there's another way to do it. If you, again, cut away this piece here. Now, this is a body post, and that body post actually fits into that hole. Now, the reality is it does precious little. There's enough body mounting just in these two screws here to hold the body on really well. You don't really need that pin. And that pin is causing a problem because it means you're crushing the wires underneath here, which is not doing you any favours whatsoever. So be gone with that, and you'll be good for some nice new clearance, and you can use silicone wires and everything else, and that'll be a lot better. So the other way that you can improve it using your Slotting Plus guide is if I put my Slotting Plus guide in my setup plate and then put the whole thing together like that, and then bring it up to the camera again, you will see that the ride height is virtually unchanged. And the reason why is because this standard Slotting Plus guide doesn't have a ridge in the bottom of the shaft, and also this plate here is very thin. So the other way to do it is you remove half of this ridge here, which will compensate for the thickness of this guide here, and that will give you, and then if you use 0.3 or 0.2 mil thick racing braids or standard braids that are a little bit thinner, that will give you a really nice supple braid that's firm in contact with the track because the whole chassis is nice and level. And then you'll get really nice ground clearance just by using some 0.2 or 0.3 racing braid, soft copper braid, because the problem with the standard braid is it's far too stiff and it keeps the front end up in the air, which is no good. So that's the second way to do it. Some decent 0.2 or 0.3 copper braid and a Slotting Plus guide, and trim this little ridge down by half. Now, with all that said, I'm going to do it the Swift Slots way. Okay, so we need to start on this chassis. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove all the bits that are in my way that I don't actually want to be there. So let's get rid of all that lot first, and also get rid of these awful wires that just constantly get in my way and annoy me no end. Right, that's one gone finally, and let's get rid of the other one now. These wires are really quite annoying. When you try to put the bodies back on, they just get in the way. They're an absolute nightmare. Right, so that's that. I'll get rid of that. Right, so the next job, once that lot's gone, is to get rid of all the offending pieces of plastic, which is most of this support here. I'm going to leave the bottom piece for strength, and then I'm going to remove this front end here and then trim it all back. So we're going to get that motor out. You need to be careful with these motor brackets. You need to just ease them to the side and not actually put too much strain on them, otherwise they'll snap. So then we want to get rid of all this bit here because it's broken anyway, which is very annoying. So we get rid of all that, and because these little gussets are going to be in our way, we need to get rid of those as well. Like I say, this chassis was broken in the first place, so it doesn't really pain me to chop up this old body because it's broken anyway. So we need to get all that out there, like that. And then what we'll do afterwards, now we'll just go around and clean that all up, get it all nice and square. But I can do it now. And there we are. So that's all cleaned up now. So we got no bracketry on the motor side, and we've cleaned up all the guide holding stuff in the front of the car, and there's now plenty of room for that guide to rotate. It's on exactly the same limited throw as the original car because I don't want to chop into this bulkhead here and remove even more strength to these sections here, because I'd quite like to keep these parts because I don't want to chop away all of the car. So what I now need to do is create a brass plate with upturned sides that fits in this section here and also comes up so that it actually meets the back of this motor just here. Obviously I've lost the reference on this motor now, but that's fine, I can get that back. That's no problem at all. It's just like, there we are, there. So it lines up there. The motor in fact sits on these wings, so you've got your reference there as it comes down and hits on that. We can always pop the back axle in now, and we can just double check that it's all happy and dandy, which it is. So there we are. So that's it. So we need to make a plate that runs in here, upturned side, so it encapsulates the holes for the front axle. Need to bring it up here and to put a very small joggle around this plate here to keep the strength so it comes over the back end of this bush here to hold the motor, and it needs to come forward enough so that I can get my brass turned guide holder up the front. So let's crack on, let's make this brass plate. And there we are. That's quite a lot of brass fashioning for the bracket. So we'll stop just here so we can sort of catch a breath and see where we're at with the project. So if we pop the back axle, actually no, if we put the motor in first, we can slide it in without straining those little motor brackets, and then pop the back axle in. This is sometimes trickier than it appears. There we are. And then the bracket now goes in there, holds the back of that motor, and then drops down into there. Now, as you can see, that's holding the motor absolutely fine. Got a really nice lock on that motor in there now. And the bracket fits in between this bulkhead here and the one at the front. It comes up to encapsulate the front axle, so when we're finished we can drill the hole through. And there's plenty of excess material up here so that I can pop my brass post, I guess, tube in there and solder it in, and then we can finish fashioning this up at the front. And then once we've got the guide in place, I can then put I'll rivet the chassis, the brass chassis, down to the plastic chassis at that point. Then I can finalize the holes where the front axle goes, and that's about it. That's pretty much the job done. We can get some nice silicone wires on this motor as opposed to those horrible nasty Scalextric ones, and we'll be good to go. Right, so that's it. So the next job then, I think, is to turn up the brass tube on the front, get the front end all sorted out, rivet it in, and then we can think about locating the axles. And there it is, all finished. My brass plate glued and copper riveted to this chassis. And as we can see, the back of the mount is holding the motor really securely and nicely. The sides are upturned, holding the front axle, and the front end holding the guide super smooth. It's free to move up and down and also free to self-center. And then we can see the copper rivets are nice and smooth to the chassis, not interfering with anything whatsoever. And if we put the car on the track and move the front wheels, you can see that they're turning freely, but they're also free to turn with the tips of your fingers with almost no resistance. And the all-important ground clearance is a nice even 3mm all the way across. Now this car does rise a little bit high anyway, that's the nature of the car, but at least 3mm is an awful lot better than 7mm. I think we can all agree on that. So there she is with her body on, and you can now see with the front body post removed, it's not actually causing a problem to the front of that car at all. That's still nice and solid, and the guide is still nice and free to self-center. So With the body on and all the work done, I think it's time to hit the track. So that fixes the two biggest problems with my 40-year-old Scalextric March. Now, has it turned it into a modern slot car? Absolutely not. But has it turned it into a usable, enjoyable car to drive? Yes, it absolutely has. Now, there is still one big problem left with this car, and that's the fact that the back end tramps an awful lot when you try and give it some power. But that's a tuning problem, and this video wasn't about tuning this car. This video is about getting that front end down, making the car usable, and taking out all that ridiculous amount of travel in the front axle, which is not supporting the car as it goes into a corner. And to that end, it's worked. Now, has it set Crow Valley alight? No, it hasn't. This is the time here, a mid 55. Now, to be honest with you, I was expecting just a little bit more. I thought I could get it to at least 53. But 55 is quite good because I hadn't accounted for the back end tramping under acceleration. So if I could tune that tramping out of the car, I reckon she would be a low 50. She's not going to break the sub 50 second. That's asking a bit too much without a lot of work. But a mid 55 is actually pretty reasonable for Crow Valley, especially with a car that's so old. Now, this car was never ever designed with performance in mind. Back in the 70s when Scalextric made this, they had no idea about performance. It doesn't even come with a magnet. I mean, the original Scalextric track is quite crude stuff, and this was probably designed to go around that, and probably didn't go around it all that well either. But modern tracks and modern scenarios, we expect a bit more, and I think 55 seconds for this car is a really good time, considering it was never designed to have performance in mind, and I'm really happy with it now. So that piece of brass in the front has added a little bit of weight, which I suppose could be upgrading, but it's not really, and that adds 5 grams of weight, and I believe this car is coming in around about 65 grams total weight now, if I recall correctly. And it handles pretty well. So I'm pretty sure with a little bit of weight in the back, possibly true the rear tyres up a little bit more, possibly true up the rear wheels as well, and I reckon we can get this thing to accelerate smoothly. I think it should be good for a low 50, but I'm really happy with where she is now. I'm not going to change it anymore. It's a mid 70s old Scalextric car. I don't want to go down the tuning road of this car. I just want to make it work nicely, and to that end it does. Now, what I've done in this video isn't particularly difficult. You can do it a number of different ways. The way I did it required a little bit of accuracy just to get that brass plate nice, but it's all pretty easy stuff. If you just buy a piece of brass, you can fold it up yourself, have a couple of goes, buy a piece big enough to throw away. You can chop up a few bits of brass, or even make the parts in separate parts and then solder them all together and then bolt it into the chassis. You could do it that way as well if you wanted to improve your car. It's a little bit involved. It took me about a day to do mine, but the results are well worth it. You'd be surprised at how well this car now goes just for getting that front guide up and that front axle held in place. It does really go very, very well. So I'm happy with mine. Not happy with this one, because that's why I'm going to sell it. So if you want this car, it's going to be listed on my website. There's a link below directly to this car. She's £35 plus postage. And if you want a piece of history of what I've bought historically so you can take it on yourself, then you know where the link is. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video and hopefully you've taken something useful from it. And if you've really enjoyed it, maybe you'll subscribe. And if you could hit the little bell, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.